Hello and welcome to The Making of Man. My name is Matthew Rodriguez, and today I'm talking with Doug Hinderer about marriage. Doug is a husband of one, a father of 9, a grandfather of 8, and a licensed marriage and family therapist. You can visit Doug's site at www.happymarriageforlife.com. There you'll find a number of blog posts as well as 2 courses. One for marriage discernment, meant for couples who are discerning marriage together, and one for marriage tune-up, which is for couples whose marriages have gone away from the path that they wanted them to go, and they're looking to bring it back. With all that, we'll get to the conversation. Enjoy.
Nice.
Welcome, Doug.
It's good to be here.
So primarily, the topic is going to be about Catholic marriage, although I'm sure we'll get into other stuff. And so I thought we could start out and I would have you just run me through again those numbers that you mentioned on the phone as far as kind of the successful marriage to rockier marriages or marriages that might not make it through
Sure.
the lifetime.
Yeah. So we know that nationally, the 4 out of 10 first-time marriages end in divorce. It's about 50% all in, because second marriages end in divorce about 66% of the time. Third marriages about 75% of the time. So practice does not make perfect. You got your best shot with your first spouse. So about 40% end in marriage. The Catholic number is a little bit better. Catholic first-time marriages end in divorce like 33, 35%. So we're a little bit better, but still that's a terrible number. All right, so we look at that. I mean, 60% of the people who are going to get married this year are not going to get divorced. So what's their story? And the reality is, of that 60%, roughly 3/4 of them will say that they are not happily married. Only about 25% of the 60% actually going to be happily married. So that means out of all couples getting married this year, about 15% of them will go on to actually be happily married. And that's those aren't great odds. So it's a scary proposition.
Yeah. Well, and with that, what would be so kind of focusing in on that 15%, what would be like a non-negotiable good habit or behavior to have to make it, or to strive to make it to that 15%?
Yeah. There are a few things that those couples have in common. I think one of which, I think the one's probably at the top in my mind, is this idea of I'm here to serve you. And we both put the other one ahead of ourselves. And I'm here to love you with a servant mindset. I'm here to, as Christ said, right? He came not to be served, but to serve. God himself showed up to be a man of service. And if every husband says, yeah, I'm here to serve my wife, that's going to go a long way to making her really happy and helping her feel really safe and protected and well loved. And so, and if the wife returns the favor, boy, then you've got a marriage that's built on both of us focused on each other's happiness and what the other one needs. That's going to go a long way to keep you happy in the long term, for sure.
Yeah. Well, and I think for maybe younger men, they know that, they've been told that as they've kind of grown up to serve, but there's a lot of discourse today on kind of how a man should act in a relationship, kind of what women are expecting. And people go back and forth on kind of the different roles that men should play. And some, think of gender roles as more rigid, and some think of gender roles as a little bit more malleable and like this, service where that
Yeah.
can apply to anything. That can be doing the dishes, right? That can
Yeah.
that can be
Yeah.
changing the diaper. And I think there's a lot of advice that's coming out for men that's not that. That is more rigid gender roles, and I think men gravitate towards that because it is like objective. It's like, okay, like here are actions that I can do
Yeah.
versus like an overall service mindset. And
Yeah.
so I'm wondering, underneath that umbrella of the service mindset, do you have recommendations for any kind of objective gender roles that men can kind of put forward in their houses, or is it just kind of more fluid and malleable?
Yeah. No, it's a really deep question. We could fill up the entire hour with it, I think. So yeah, if ever there's an area in our society that is just so confused and so turned upside down, it's this whole idea of gender roles and what's a man or what's a woman, and um, and it's never been an issue up until like the past 5 years, right? I mean, every society has clearly known what a man is and what a woman is, and it's been well understood. And now the whole thing has been tipped upside down. And I think, and I see that often now with men in marriages, they just don't know what they're supposed to do. And to your point, they're like, well, if you just give me a list, I can do it. I can salute and obey. Tell me what my job is and I'll do it. And most wives are like, I don't want to have to tell you. I just want you to know what I need. I want you to be able to anticipate that I will be happy if you open the car door for me. I will be happy if you do that. I will be happy if you change a diaper. I will be happy if you vacuum the living room. But if I have to ask you to do it, boy, somehow it just means you're really not paying attention to me. You're not focused on the relationship. So men need to do a much better job of getting out ahead of it. When I think about this, and two things. As a practical matter, when you get married, you've got to negotiate who's doing what. Who's taking the trash out, who's cooking, you got to negotiate all that. All that stuff is up for negotiation, especially nowadays. And a lot of women are still working, or they're working part-time or whatever. And that's important. You got to negotiate those things. So when I first got married, like 43 years ago, my wife and I agreed. We had our first apartment was on the second floor. I would take the trash out. All right, that's pretty clear, right? How can you get in a fight about that? It's really clear. Doug takes the trash out. But we would get into fights about when the trash can was actually full. Because I would just say, no, I can step on it. I can stand on it. I can get another day's worth. And she's like, no, the bag is full. Please just take it out. Right.
Yeah.
So you still a lot of negotiation that goes on and a lot of learning how to work with each other. The other thing I'd say is that's the first thing. You got to negotiate this. But the second thing is that we live in a society where masculine virtue has been virtually destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
And men are afraid to be men, and they don't even know what it means to be a man now.
Mm-hmm.
And give me a good male role model. There aren't many of them, out there right now in society. And at least when I was growing up back in the 50s and the 60s, there were good male role models, at least on TV. You had Father Knows Best, and you had My Three Sons, and you had The Rifleman, and you had these strong men who provided for their family and protected them, and they were willing to work hard and fight for what was right, and they had a code of values. That doesn't exist now, and I haven't watched much TV at all in the past couple of decades. But all the men now in the sitcoms are just they're the loser in the family. They're the ones who get it.
They're usually the comedic element of the
they're the
episode.
foil. Yeah, they're the foil in the whole thing. So there aren't any good role models. And it's one thing I encourage men to do is go back and watch old westerns. Go back and watch the westerns that were filmed in the 60s, because you had real men who did real manly things back then, and you get a feel for it. The other thing I'd say, though, is on a more practical level is, print out, go online or whatever, get a book, but print out a list of virtues and identify those that are uniquely masculine virtues, and then work hard to develop those particular virtues. And then it's in a Catholic perspective that these are virtues, these are good qualities that men should have. I mean, and like things like being long suffering and being temperate and having fortitude and magnanimity is a great male virtue. This is this aspiration to do something great. Right. It's the virtue of magnanimity that's got you doing this podcast. Mm-hmm. Right. It's like, I'm going to step up and do something, hopefully, that's really meaningful. And maybe it fails. Okay. I'm taking that risk. I'm sticking myself out there to do something that's valuable. Well, that's a very manly virtue of magnanimity, and prudence and meekness and humility. So there's a lot of good male virtues. And so I encourage young men to identify one or two virtues that they really want to acquire. That's a very strong manly virtue. And then work on acquiring that virtue. And then when you get it at a pretty good level, move on to another virtue and move on to another one.
Hmm.
And, the first step on the road to being declared a saint by the church is a declaration that you live the virtues heroically. Well, good. Let's focus on developing those manly virtues, because it probably didn't get passed on to us too much when we were growing up, and it's not getting passed on to us by society. Kind of a long
Hmm.
answer, but that's how I see it.
No, I mean, I think you're right that could fill the whole hour just with that. There's a priest, Father Don Calloway, and I think I've talked about it before on this podcast, but he was one of the influences that um, really encouraged me to start this. He came out with the consecration to Saint Joseph, which I've done and really appreciated, and kind of in that vein of, okay, like there's no kind of tangible present day role models, but we can still look to the saints. And in an interview, he said that we had experienced a cultural patricide, which I thought was a fantastic, just short to the point description of what we've experienced of, yeah, like culturally. And there are men that have stepped up. And the thing that I think is so funny is they say very simple things, and they, we all know them. It's the Jordan Petersons, it's the Jocko Wellings, it's, Jordan Peterson, he goes more into it, but one of his pieces of advice is to clean your room. Like that is a extremely fatherly fatherly impulse. So I think we are striving to kind of course correct in some regards, but no, I think that's great advice to try and just be intentional about the virtues that you seek to cultivate.
I was going to say, but there are some voices sounding in the darkness here for what it means to be a man and a person of virtue. And Jordan Peterson is one of those.
Mm-hmm.
But look at how he suffered because of it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there we are definitely, I think, in an age of martyrdom for what it means to be a real man and stand up for what makes sense, what's true and logical and rational, which is what Jordan Peterson is doing.
Mm-hmm.
And he's suffering a lot because of it. And
Mm-hmm.
so but the willingness to suffer and endure difficult things is one of the hallmarks of being a man. Is that we're going to work hard, we're going to suffer, we're going to sweat, we're going to spend ourselves heroically in the service of our wife and our children, and that's going to imply suffering.
Yeah. On that point, Jordan has been able to make a business basically out of doing what he's doing. But I think that there are a lot of men that maybe have that impulse that if they take the road less traveled, it will not lead to economic prosperity. Let's just say that.
Sure.
And then there's also the impulse to provide and protect for your wife and family. And
Yeah.
they might feel, caught in between those two things. Do you have any
Mhm.
recommendations for ways
Yeah.
to navigate things today?
Well, yeah, and I think yes, and you hit the two key words: provide and protect. And I see there's an awful lot of young couples I work with where the husband doesn't get that idea of provide. He tends to say, well, no, she's supposed to contribute half of the money. And, well, who's going to raise the kids? Well, we'll put them in daycare. That's contrary to my way of looking at things anyway, is that, women are uniquely gifted by God to care for these children. And it's our obligation, I think, as men to provide the financial wherewithal so that our wives can stay home and be full-time moms if they so choose. Maybe they'll choose not to, but you don't want them to have to go to work. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes in my when I was growing up, just about every dad I knew was working a second job. I mean, my dad went out and started a small business in the basement just to make the money to pay our tuition at Catholic schools. And my dad wasn't even Catholic, and he still did it because he thought it was valuable, right? So I don't know too many men now that work a second job,
Mm-hmm.
and so we expect our wives to pull, some sort of financial weight in the family, and I think that's a shame. I will tell you how it played out in my life. We have 9 children. I always wanted to be a marriage therapist from the time I got my bachelor's degree in 1979. But this is a really low-paying profession, and there's no way you're going to raise 9 kids on what I make as a marriage therapist. And so I went into the corporate world, got a job in the corporate world, and had a fair amount of success there. Was able to make enough um, money to put my kids through school, good Catholic schools and college. And then when I got to the end of that, I got to the point where I was able to walk away from that job and then get retrained to be a marriage therapist. And now this is what I'm doing. This is my second career, and I intend to do it till the day I die.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's just, I'm not saying everybody should follow the path that I followed, but the responsibility to provide for your family is really important. And in my opinion, the man is the one who needs to step up and make sure that happens, whatever that
Mm-hmm.
takes.
Mm-hmm.
Short of Robin Banks, of course.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that works into the theme of men just being more initiating. If we can think about service as being initiating, is, you kind of have surveyed the needs of your wife or your family, and then you fill
Yeah.
the gaps that are there, or
Mhm.
do whatever needs to be done. Then this is kind of also the economic side of that, in a way of, you can see the economic needs of your family, and then you can, whether it's taking on another job, whether it's become an entrepreneur, or whatever it is,
Yeah.
to try and fit that. So I think that might be a good framework for men to think through, is just like, what aspects of your life can you initiate on.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've kind of discussed what to do in order to make it into that 15% of happy, successful marriages.
Yeah.
Taking a look on the other side, and what not to do. What's like a non-negotiable, cut it out now, it's done as of today kind of behavior or habit
Yeah.
that men need
Yeah.
to drop?
Yeah. To me, if I were going to sum it up, the thing that gets in the way of just about every, and it manifests in different ways, but the thing that shows up in just about every couple I work with is selfishness. I want it my way. I don't want to stop doing this. I don't want to give up my health club. I don't want to give up my hobby. I don't want to give up this, that, or the other thing. I want it my way. And I want you to do what I want you to do when I want you to do it. And so this whole thing that somehow I'm entitled to have my needs met. I'm entitled to have you do what I want you to do to make me happy. So this focus on myself, my happiness, is what gets in the way of just about every marriage. The couples that I've had virtually zero success working with are ones where it's almost always the guy who's a narcissist,
Mm.
right? And a narcissist just focuses on what I want. I mean, I'm the smartest guy here, and I'm special, and everybody needs to take care of me, including my wife and my children, et cetera. And so if you look at a lot of the personality disorders, they're all just different versions of selfishness. I want what I want. I want it my way. And I'm not about to give in. So it's just the opposite of what a service mindset is. Service
Mm-hmm.
mindset is I put myself last. I put you first. Selfishness, I put me first. I put you last. And that's like a poison that gets into a marriage and will destroy it over time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting, and definitely, I think, hopefully, something that men can recognize in themselves. If they're struggling to recognize selfishness in their marriage, maybe it's, they're mirroring what they saw their parents do, or that's
Sure.
just kind of what they think to do. Are there any behaviors that can be kind of red flags to them, that if they're listening to this and then kind of examining how
Mm-hmm.
they go about the day, that might make them more aware of
Yeah.
selfish activity?
I think, yeah. Yes. Mostly that shows up in the thoughts, okay, and what I'm
Mm.
thinking. And generally, when I start thinking, and I use these two words, I want, I'm now moving into the realm of selfishness, right? I want, my wife to make me breakfast every morning. I want my wife to make my lunch. I want my wife to do the laundry. I want. So I got these needs, and I want someone else to fill them. So anytime you start your thinking with those two words, I want, you're heading down the road of selfishness, most likely. Now you could say, I want my family to love God. Okay, I'm good with that, right? But the I want is what's best for them. But normally when you say I want, you're thinking about what's best for you. And I expect other people to line up and give me what I want. So that's the warning sign. So if you find yourself saying that a lot, is I want, you're probably going through this thing rather selfishly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if that dovetails with this, but I've seen advice that whenever a couple is to kind of talk, instead of um, criticizing maybe some action that the other person is doing, you focus on how that makes you feel. So you say
Yeah.
like, "I feel X." Is
Correct.
that still like kind of not being selfish, or is that selfish as well? Of
No,
kind of
that's good.
focusing. Okay.
That's
Okay.
good. And so the communication technique that I teach my couples, I call it gentle startup. It comes from John Gottman primarily. But it's got three parts to it, but it starts with the words I feel. And then you label your emotions. So I feel frustrated, I feel angry, I feel lonely, I feel anxious. I feel when you, and then I say what you did. So I feel worried when you come home late and don't call and tell me you're going to be late. Okay. And then the third sentence is, and I'd like to ask you to please, what you'd like them to do different next time.
Mm.
So I feel worried when you come home late and don't call and tell me you're going to be late. I'd like to ask you to please call if you're going to be more than 15 minutes late. Oh, okay, I can do that. So when you start with because here's the deal. In 99.9% of the marriages, I want to be the perfect husband. I want to be the perfect wife, right? And if I'm missing that, I'd like to know what I'm doing wrong so I can do better. And if you can tell me that without making me feel like a failure or treating me disrespectfully, those are the two things that really trigger men.
Mm.
Is feeling of failure and being disrespected. We have a real hard time with both of those. And if our wife can tell us what we're doing and still treat us with respect and not make me feel like a loser, man, I want that feedback all day long because I want to be the perfect husband. So if you start off saying, "Hey, I feel kind of bad based on what you did," man, I'm like, "Oh, I don't want you to feel bad. I want you to feel great every minute of the day. And if I'm doing something that's resulting in you not feeling good, man, I sure do want to stop doing it." And if you can communicate that, I talk about it in terms of being able to complain without blame.
Mm.
Okay, I can complain about what's going on without blaming you. You're not doing it because you're a bad person, but you just were, you just took your eye off the ball. You took your eye off of me for a while, or you whatever, and you left me feeling lonely or whatever. So
Yeah.
yes, I feel is a really good way to start the conversation.
Okay. Okay. So I feel is good. I want not so good. Um,
Perfect. That's right.
yeah. No, good to know. That actually makes me think of when you mentioned like how men take criticism. Someone had a commentary on St. Paul. I think it's in Ephesians where he says, "So husbands love your wives, and wives
Yes.
respect your husbands."
Yeah.
And someone had a commentary where it's just like that's how each kind of gender operates, where
Correct.
women operate based on love and men operate based on respect,
Hmm.
which I thought was like a really interesting way to like go about it. And like that's in this person's mind, that's where the feuds come from, is
Hmm.
when women don't understand or don't kind of enter into the language of respect when they're talking to their husband, and
Correct.
when husbands don't enter into the language of love when they talk to their wives.
Yeah, absolutely right. I agree with that 100%. The part B to that, the flip side of that is, yes, women get triggered if they're not feeling loved, men if they're not feeling respected. The flip side of that is a man's greatest fear is failure, woman's greatest fear is abandonment. I think
Mm,
that's scriptural as well, but you got
mm,
to go back to Genesis for that. What was Adam's sin before he even ate the apple? Adam's first sin was he failed to protect his wife. She was in danger. The serpent is in the garden, and he didn't come to protect her. So Adam's first sin was failure. I believe, I'm not a theologian, but I believe that when us men inherit original sin, part of what we inherit is a fear of failure, because it was Adam's failure that set the table that led to Eve's failure in the eating of the apple.
mhm.
I think also you go to the Garden of Eden when God created Adam, he looked down and said, not good for that boy to be alone. He needs help. I'm going to create for him a helpmate. And he created a woman, not another guy who can help you build a barn or plow a field or watch football on Sundays. He created a woman, radically
Yeah.
different in so many ways, whose job description is go help the boy. And so when we push our wives aside, we don't let them help us. We leave them feeling abandoned or lonely. Very triggering for a woman because she's here to help us. And when we don't let that happen, that's very triggering. So a woman's number one fear is abandonment or loneliness. And so we need to be sensitive to all four of those. respect and failure for a man, love and abandonment for a woman. Those are the most triggering things that really cause a lot of disharmony in marriage.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's a great addition. And yeah, I have a friend who considers himself a Genesis 3 expert who goes through and he
Yeah.
tries to pull out a lot of different relationship pieces of advice from Genesis 3. So
Yeah.
highly recommend if anyone's or to anyone that's listening that they go through and take a look at that. Okay, one other thing that causes strife, I think maybe especially today, maybe it's always been the case, but it seems especially today, is children and when to
Yeah.
have children. And so I feel like, again, this is a place where there are two kind of polar opposite camps that almost make it seem like there's no third option. There's one camp that's like, you know, if if you've graduated college without getting married and starting a family, you know, you're behind the eight ball. And the other camp that says, you know, don't start a family until you're in the C-suite
Yeah.
and you can do that.
Yeah.
Um, what are your recommendations in regards to family planning and how couples can, as like a unit, go through that thought process?
Yeah. Yeah, I've got some pretty strong feelings about it. I'll try to temper it. I'll try not to get it on my podium. Um, and my wife and I have 9 children, and I'm really disappointed. I mean, I was really hoping we'd hit double digits, right? Every child adds so much richness and depthness to your life that they're irreplaceable. But we live in a society that doesn't value children. We kill 1 million of them a year before they're even born. Um, and then even if you have children, you're only allowed to have two. So we just live in a society where children are looked at as curses, not as blessings. And so I think, in terms of postponing kids, I don't think it's a good idea. I think you should have them early and often. I think that's the deal. And I think you go back to Genesis. What was the first commandment that God gave Adam and Eve?
Mm-hmm.
The very first commandment. It's the 28th line of Genesis, first chapter of Genesis, 28th line. I don't know how many lines of scripture there are, but tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. The 28th one, be fruitful and multiply, right? So that's the first thing he told him to do. Your husband and wife, now go bring new life into the world. And here's the deal. And it's somewhere, one of St. Paul's writings, he asked the question, what do you have that you've not been given, right? And the implication, everything we have is a gift from God. Right, your intelligence, your IQ, your ability to make money, the chair you're sitting on, all these are gifts from God. I think there's one exception to that, and I think that's a child. The child is the one thing we can give God that he doesn't already have. So it's not like God's got, a few million babies on shelves, up in heaven. And he's like, all right, well, I'm going to give you this baby. You need an athletic baby. Here, this one's going to, and you need an intellectual baby. Here's a smart one. If we don't do our part first, to bring those two cells together to form that two-celled human being, God doesn't create the soul, which is destined to live forever. And so I think in a very real way, you talk about, yes, children being gifts from God, for sure. But it's also our gift to God. We can give him something he doesn't have. And that's a powerful idea to wrap your brain around. That, wait a minute, every child that gets conceived by the two of us is something we're giving to God that he didn't have before. That's a staggering thought. So I think you should not be afraid to bring children into the world. And I'm hard pressed to come up with a good reason not to do it. And and the church teaches there can be valid reasons to postpone having children. I get it. I'm not sure what those valid reasons are, to be honest with you. There's some in terms of physical health, certainly of the, especially of the mom, or emotional health, certainly of either one. If there are some emotional health issues going on, I think those are valid reasons. I'm not sure money is a valid reason, quite frankly. My mother was one of 10. They grew up they were dirt poor farmers. Literally one of those like Little House on the Prairie stories. They carried their shoes to school, and they had one bicycle between the 10 kids, and the boys didn't let the girls ride the bicycles, and the one bicycle. So they grew up with a lot of poverty, and all 10 of those kids went on to practice their faith. Most of them were daily communicants till the day they died. Um, well, that's not a bad story, right? And so I don't know, this quality of life. Well, yeah, I need to have X amount of money in the bank, or I need to have the car paid off, or I need to have a house. I understand it, but I don't know, compared to the unbelievable value of one human life, that those arguments really carry a lot of weight. So
Mm-hmm.
that's how I see it.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say this: listen, if you don't want to have children, you shouldn't get married. That's just it. If you don't want children, don't get married. That's the purpose of marriage. God said, "Here, you're married. Now go have children."
Yeah.
And if you don't want children, you're not fulfilling God's will, flat out. And if you don't have children, don't get married. Sorry, that's my soapbox thing.
Yeah. No, but I mean, I think that's good. And, we've really pushed away any option besides kind of
Yeah,
marriage in today's
yeah.
day and age. I'm preparing for another podcast, and there's this guy who he has a podcast called the Manly Saints Project, and he goes through, and it's kind of amazing. I get that this wasn't the case for every person, and especially for firstborns and stuff like that. There was maybe more pressure that we can relate to today on getting married and keeping the family title and stuff like that. But if you were third, it was like, okay, like you're probably going to go to a monastery. That was just the the idea that you did. And again, that's a little tongue in cheek, but just there was so much allowance to not be married. You had to do something for God in your life, or at least that's the way that it's presented. But
well, I will tell you this: my third son is in the seminary, so maybe there is some truth to that number 3.
yeah,
Here, so.
yeah. But just that idea of you can be a monk, you can be a priest. Like there are other options that don't entail marriage.
Yeah, that's right.
So
yeah.
No, I think that's I think that's wise. Kind of looking on maybe more detailed as far as things kind of not to do in your marriage, things to look out for. Maybe this is like the foil to the virtues that we talked about beforehand. Is you have this idea of the 4 horsemen of a relationship.
Yeah.
And I am hoping you could kind of dive into that and see if we've been in Genesis. Now we're going to Revelation. That's
right. Beginning and the end of the scripture. Yeah. This was a discovery of a guy named Dr. John Gottman, who's the leading researcher in the United States, what marriage is all about. He's been studying marriages for over 50 years. And he's a Jewish guy, but he labeled it a Christian term, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. So what he found in all of his research is there are 4 behaviors that result in all of the disharmony in a marriage. And if they get out of control, they result in divorce. And the first one is criticism. And we know what criticism is. It's when I point out what's wrong with you. And thank goodness I'm here to tell you how messed up you are. Otherwise, you'd go through life like that. Well, if criticism worked, every couple would be perfectly happily married after about a year. I'd point out everything wrong with you, and you'd fix yourself, and you'd point out everything wrong with me, and I'd fix myself, and we'd run out of stuff to complain about after about a year. But that doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work is if the wife is loving the criticism, well, the husband's feeling like a failure, and that's the very triggering thing for the husband. And if the husband is leveling the criticism, the wife isn't feeling too loved. Like every time you talk to me, you're telling me what's wrong with me. I'm not feeling too loved, right? So it really triggers those 2 things. So criticism obviously doesn't work. Number 2 is contempt. Think of contempt as mean-spirited criticism. This is name-calling, devaluing, put down, sarcasm. Contempt is the most deadly of the 4 horsemen. If at a high level, it almost always destroys the marriage, because I'm trying to hurt you now verbally. I'm angry, and I'm going to say some things that are going to really cut deep, and it's really hard to repair those wounds. So contempt is a really, really bad thing. Defensiveness, that's pretty clear. It's not my fault; it's your fault. Everything that's wrong in this marriage is your fault. And I did. I had a young couple I was working with, married less than 6 months. And when I started working with a new couple, I have an individual session with both the husband and the wife. And when I met with the husband, he said, Doug, he said, listen, I'm not perfect, but 95% of what's wrong in this marriage is because of my wife's fault. I'm like, really? 95%? And I thought, you know what? We'll have 2 or 3 more sessions and this guy's going to quit. As soon as we start talking about how he's contributing to disharmony, he's going to walk away. And he did. We had 3 more sessions and he made his wife call me to quit. He didn't even have the courage to do it himself. So defensiveness, you've got to own your piece of what's going on. Okay. And maybe you're only 10% responsible, maybe 50, maybe 80. I don't know, but you got a piece of it and you've got to be able to own it. So defensiveness doesn't work. And then stonewalling, which is where you just shut down and walk away. I can't take it anymore. And I'm done. I'm done having this fight and we're not doing it anymore. And in the early years of my marriage, before I knew any of this, my wife and I would get in an argument about something, I don't know, taking the garbage out, right? And I'd get upset and I'd say, hey, I'm done with this conversation. She'd say, no, we can't be done. See, if I walk away, that's leaving her feeling abandoned, right? And lonely, which is very triggering for a woman. And I'd walk away and she'd follow me, literally physically. She'd follow me around, into the bedroom, around the bed, down the stairs, out to the garage until I'd say something really hurtful. I'd go to contempt. She'd start crying and the fight would be over. Well, not exactly the way you want to handle it, but I didn't know a better way. She didn't know a better way. And I didn't know I had to not walk away and stay there. Now, the research from Gottman is pretty clear. Once your heart rate gets above about 100 beats per minute, you've lost your ability to be rational and logical. You're now in fight or flight. I don't want to get in a big fight, so I'm just going to get out of here. So it makes sense if I'm going to start dropping into contempt to get out of there, because that's going to be even more damaging. So the idea is to be able to call a timeout, tell your wife, listen, I need to take a break. I will come back in an hour. Let's talk about this some more. Now your wife's not going to feel abandoned. She's not going to feel lonely. She's going to feel valued and loved because you're coming back. So nothing wrong calling a timeout, but to just shut down, stop talking and walk away, very, very damaging. Your wife's not going to feel well loved, and it's very damaging to the marriage. So those are the 4 big behaviors you have to stay away from. And when I work with couples, we spend a lot of time, they go over their fights that they've had during the week. It's like, okay, when did the criticism show up, contempt and the stonewalling and the defensiveness? When did those show up? So they can start saying, oh, wow, now I know why this thing went bad, because all of a sudden I got defensive and then it went bad. Yep. So now we start working to eliminate those things.
Mm-hmm. And is the solution to that, going back to Gottman's method that we talked about before of the I feel and then name the behavior and then name the ask?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that works most of the time. But the couple has to agree that we're going to have a new way of talking to each other now.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I'm upset, I'm going to go into what I call the formula, and you're going to accept it. You're going to say, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I don't mean to be defensive. Let me find another way to talk about it. Or you're right, I shut down and I shouldn't do that. Yeah, so I think the formula is the gentle start of the formula is a really good way to have good conversations without falling into the 4 horsemen.
Mm-hmm. Is there any benefit to kind of, critiquing with your friends, or to kind of just let a little, just, kind of get a little of the emotions out? Maybe is that because I've heard that you shouldn't do that as well. Like you should not critique your spouse really to anybody. Like if there's going to be change that happens in the relationship, it should be between the 2 of you. But I know that the argument against that, maybe it's not the most academic of arguments, is it feels good, to get with your boys and let loose.
Yeah. No, and that's exactly right. And, certainly sometimes, I'm around with a group of guys, whatever, and they're sitting around having a beer and talking, and they start complaining about their wives. Really, really bad idea. And on a couple of levels, but so I'm a little torn on it, because sometimes you need somebody to talk to. So sometimes you need maybe a best friend to be able to go to and say, hey, my wife is making me crazy. I just got to, but one person maybe, all right? But here's the deal, and I've had this happen where somebody did something stupid, like had an affair or got drunk and totaled a car or something like that, and then the spouse told everybody about it. Well,
Mm.
now my reputation is damaged. Now my image is, people are looking at me, cross-eyed, and now my mother-in-law, father-in-law aren't sure they like me anymore. And now my wife and I have gotten back together. We've healed the damage, but the other people haven't really forgiven me yet. Now I got to figure all that out.
Mm-hmm.
So I will tell you that my mother, this farm girl, right, who grew up in all this poverty, is very wise. And the one thing she said to my wife when we got married, she said, "Listen, I know Doug, and I know he can be a real idiot sometimes." She might have used a stronger word than that. And she said, "So if he's getting on your nerves and you need to complain, call me and complain to me about him. Don't go to your parents because I will always love him because I've loved him all these years in spite of how stupid and all the dumb things he's done. And I will always love him. So call me and complain to me because I will agree with you because there's nothing he's going to do with you that he hadn't done with me. But if you call your parents, they may not forgive him as readily as I will." And I thought that was really wise advice. And I've passed that advice on to, at this point, I have, what do I have? I have 2 son-in-laws and a daughter-in-law. And I've passed that advice on to them. When my kid, and I know how screwy they can be, when they get on your nerves, call me, complain to me. And I think that's good advice, but
Mm-hmm.
not good to start complaining a lot about your spouse. It's going to put her in a bad light to your friends and family, especially with family. You don't want to do that.
Mm-hmm. With some of those more grievous mistakes that someone can make in a relationship, like you mentioned, the affair and things like that. What are just some ways, or whether it's a tactic or just kind of like a mental framework that a couple can kind of work through that stuff? Because there's a lot of people that um, criticize the Catholic way of marriage because there's no out, right? There's no
Yeah.
divorce. And so,
Except Jordan
that
Peterson, who sees the unbelievable brilliance of that. But
yes, but so if there is something that is that the world would see as catastrophic for the marriage, right? A
yeah,
marriage ender, but
yeah,
we don't have that option. Is What would your recommendation be on how to like kind of sift through that, work through that?
yeah. I mean, the number one thing is our affairs, where the world says, "Hey, get rid of him. He wasn't faithful." And I think here's the deal: no marriage can survive without the virtue of forgiveness. Period. End of story. Normally, the things we have to forgive are pretty minimal things, like, yep, I forgot to stop off and pick up the milk on the way home from work. I'm sorry. Most of it's that kind of stuff. The affairs, the getting drunk, told in a car, the losing 20 grand at the casino, that stuff doesn't happen too often. And it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
happen in most marriages. Most marriages don't have anything really big that happens, but some do. And a lot of those then end up, on my computer screen because they're coming for help because something big went wrong. At the end of the day, you've got to be able to forgive. You've got to work on forgiveness. And it's important to realize that, forgiveness is not an option. It was a commandment. It was a very clear commandment from Jesus. Now, we see it in I went through it, 6 or 7 places in the Gospels where he was very clear that we have to forgive. First is in the Our Father, where very clearly, forgive us as we've forgiven others. Immediately after that, I think in Matthew's Gospel, he says, I will tell you, if you forgive others, your Heavenly Father will forgive you. And if you do not forgive others, your Heavenly Father will not forgive you. Well, I don't know about you, but I know I got a lot of stuff I need to be forgiven for to get into heaven. The best way I could be assured of that is to go around forgiving other people. And my wife gives me things to forgive. I give her lots of things to forgive on a daily basis. And so forgiveness is a really important part. And I've got a whole worksheet that I help couples with if they're really struggling with forgiveness. But we work a lot on forgiveness, because you're showing up on, in my office because something bad's going on and I can't really forgive it anymore. So forgiveness is the key. And part of the key to this thing is to look at your wife's defects as opportunities to grow in virtue. And if you look at her defects as opportunities to grow in virtue, now all of a sudden they are gifts from God that's helping me become more patient, kinder, gentler, more loving, more chaste. They're not things that irritate me now. Now they're opportunities to grow and develop manly virtue, which makes them really, really valuable. It would
Mhm.
be terrible, really, spiritually speaking, if we were married to a perfect woman. I know St. Joseph was, but he was a lot better than the rest of us. Most of us need a woman with defects to help us become true men.
Yeah.
And so it's a really good thing that we married women that have defects. It's a
Yeah.
really good thing,
Yeah.
supernaturally speaking. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that reminds me of a conversation I had with a friend once, where my personal theory is that there are more, married. There are many more married saints than that we don't know about.
Oh, for sure.
I definitely view the vocation to marriage as basically you're entering into those 30 years of unknown, right? And you're not gonna do the
Yeah.
flashy. Well, I don't know if flash is the right term, but you're not going to do the exceptional, miraculous work that Christ did in his last 3 years. You're going to do more of the unknown work that he did in his first 30, or that happened at Nazareth. But
That's
my
exactly right.
my
Yeah.
friend pointed out it was a little disheartening that of the married saints that we do know, most of them are saints because of the atrocious behavior of their
Yeah.
of their spouse.
Yeah.
So the
White martyrdom.
truly
Yeah.
the truly terrible marriages really make kind of the
Exactly.
more known saints, which
Yeah, I agree. St. Monica, St. Rita. I mean, a lot of
yep,
these, boy, they were married to some really terrible men.
yeah,
I'm not suggesting that your listeners should go be terrible husbands so that
no,
they sanctify their wives.
yes,
But if we happen to be married to a wife who's not perfect, we can derive great benefit from that. So
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Well, and we're coming up kind of to the end, so I want to make sure that we
Hmm.
get everything in this conversation that we want to.
Sure.
And in terms of loving like men, living like men, and leading like men, I wanted to
Yeah.
give you space to be able to talk about that and your views
Yeah.
on that and what you'd pass off as recommendations.
Yeah. It's all, I mean, yes, thank you for that. And yeah, those are the big three, right? It's just this idea of manly virtue. And I think, what I would encourage, you know, especially your single listeners, right, is what, for me to attract the kind of woman I want to attract, what kind of man is she going to be attracted to? What is she going to be looking for? And she's going to be looking for somebody, let's say, yeah, whatever, you figure it out, whatever you think is on that list, but someone who's very serious about their faith, regular with the sacraments, regular with the prayer life. Okay, good. All right, someone who can provide and protect. Okay, good. Do I know how to protect? And it's not just protect her body, right? It's not if you're walking down the street and a bad guy steps out from behind a tree. Yeah, okay. You got to protect her. You got to go fight off the bad guy. I mean, some guys that some of my daughters have dated, I think would hide behind my daughters and say, well, hey, I'm sure he's not going to hurt a woman. We'll be safe as long as I stay behind you. No. So you got to protect her body. But you also have to protect her heart, which means I will never intentionally do anything that will hurt you. Now, I'll get it wrong because I'm dumb and I'm a guy sometimes, but I'm never intentionally going to say anything or do anything that will hurt your heart. And third, I'm going to protect your soul. I will never ask you to do anything that even remotely borders on sin. Okay? And so when you're with me, you are safe. Your body is safe, your heart is safe, and your soul is safe. That's really important. Okay? And then I think, what are the other virtues that you need to develop? Well, I think, fortitude is a really good manly virtue, right? The ability to resist harmful influences, withstand difficulties, and overcome obstacles. And I think all of these good manly virtues you can learn from studying St. Joseph. And some really great books came out about Joseph a couple years back when the whole year was dedicated to him. I would read some books and study him because I think he's a great role model. Um, I think temperance. I mean, so many men mess up on temperance. We drink too much or whatever. Now pot's legal all over the place. So, men tend to go down there. I think meekness is a really manly virtue. I mean, how did Christ describe himself? described himself as meek. Well, meek doesn't mean weak, right? Meek means self-restraint and control. I can be angry, but I don't have to go around punching holes in walls or cussing and swearing, right? I can be angry but restrain myself. I'm self-control is a good part of what meekness is all about, right? And prudence, and the ability to set on a course of action to accomplish a goal. And so many young men are just lost in this world. They don't know what they want to do career-wise. They just are lost. They just don't have direction. They don't have prudence. They don't have fortitude. And so they're kind of like a ship without a rudder. They're floating around. They're not taking on water. They're not sinking, but they're really not heading anywhere as well. So I think that is a really important virtue as well to develop. So I mean, those are the things I would say, and I would make a list. The last thing I'd say is this idea of being of service to others, right? Even if you're single, well, you know what? Start working at a soup kitchen. Start working with some homeless people. Start helping out. Find something that's bigger than you are that needs help, and go help in a sacrificial way. So develop those qualities that you think a woman would really like to be attracted to, and become that man before you get married. And then look at your own habits and okay, what am I doing that would really be a turnoff for a woman, right? So am I drinking too much? Am I abusing substances? And I think, we can't have this conversation without talking about pornography, which is the scourge of every young man, and frankly, just about every man of any age, but especially young men. And, the statistics, the average age that a young kid gets his first exposure to pornography is like 10 or 11, 12, pre-puberty even, right? So many men become addicted to pornography, high school, college, for sure in college, because there are very few checks and balances, nobody looking over your shoulder in college. And so what I would say to men, the way I talk about it is I think literally 99.9% of all men are tempted by pornography, and a very high percentage of them fall, to that temptation. Well, be regular in the confessional. Get in that confessional every single time you need to. And I don't care if it's the 50th time you've confessed that sin in the last 50 weeks. Get back in there, because you need the sacramental grace to continue to fight the good fight. There's lots of great resources to help young men, all men, overcome this addiction. It's addictive. I think it's the most addictive substance on the planet. There's good resources out there to help men fight that. Research very recently that says it is in fact more addictive than cocaine, because it affects more of the neural pathways of the brain than cocaine does. So it's actually more addictive than cocaine. And it's free. You don't have to go into some dark alley somewhere to buy it, right? It's right there. It's 2 clicks away. And so really work hard to overcome that particular vice, which is so destructive on so many different levels. And hopefully you'll have an entire episode or 10 to help men overcome this problem, because it's killing so many young men. It skews how you look at women. It skews how you view chaste sex, marital sex. It skews how you view your mother and your sister and all your relationships. And anyway, so get rid of that vice for sure. Do whatever you got to do to get rid of that. So I guess that would be. I mean, what are the 5 skills, virtues you really need to be a good husband? Go and acquire those. What are the things going on in your life right now that would turn off a prospective wife if she knew what you were doing, and stop doing those things? Those are my thoughts.
No, that's great. Yeah, and as you mentioned, I didn't even crack 5 episodes before I did one on pornography.
Yeah.
Because when I reached out to people, that was top of mind. So no, all that is phenomenal, and maybe that in fact answers this last one. But I like to give all guests the opportunity to give kind of their top, regardless of the subject of this conversation.
Yeah.
If there's something else that's been on your mind recently, like what would be your top recommendation to men today? It can be related to this subject. I know that you think about it a lot, but it doesn't have to be. Just what's your top thought?
Yeah. I would say two things. Sorry. But
No,
one would
good.
be to live a deeply sacramental life. Frequent the sacraments as often as possible, especially the Holy Mass. All right. Number one. Number two, develop regular daily habits of spiritual reading and mental prayer. It is in spiritual reading where God speaks to us, and in mental prayer where we speak to Him. And so I think you need both of those, 10 or 15 minutes each day for each of those to deepen. You can't love what you don't know. Spiritual reading helps us to learn more about God and how He wants to be loved and who He is. And then prayer is our opportunity to just have a conversation with our Redeemer and our best friend, right? Who should be our best friend. So those are the things I would encourage. Develop a good spiritual life, and the rest of these things will fall into place pretty much, is my thought. There you go. The other thing I'd say, if I could, just a commercial plug, but on my website, happymarriageforlife.com, I've got 2 workshops out there. One for single people thinking about getting married, that I call marriage discernment, for couples who are dating, thinking about getting engaged. And then one I call marriage tune-up for married couples who can help them tune up their marriage, get it to the next highest level. And I think both of those are really good resources to help, especially young men, think through what marriage is all about. Think about this relationship, and are we in a good place? And does marriage make sense? And if so, what are the skills I need to do marriage well? And I go through those things as well. So I just like to throw that out there for your listeners who might find some value in that.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And I'll put a link in the description below so anyone can go to your website
Good.
and check that out.
That's good. And you can follow me on Instagram and Facebook as well. So, and I should say, I'm on Relevant Radio now, Saturday mornings at 11 Central Time. And it's a call-in show. So people can call in with their questions or frustrations or whatever about what's going on in their marriage or their neighbor's marriage, right? If they don't talk about their own marriage. And so I'm having a lot of fun doing that. And hopefully some people are benefiting from that. So
Yeah.
Relevant Radio, Saturday mornings at 11.
Awesome. So if anyone has a question that I didn't ask Doug today, you can ask him yourself. That's perfect.
I would love it. I would love it. The more callers, the better. Yeah, it's great.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Doug.
This was a great, great pleasure, Matthew. Thank you for having me on.
Of course. Thank you for watching The Making of Man. If you like that and want more, click here. And don't forget to like and subscribe.